The video had already been shared 400 times before Nathan Cross even knew his daughter was on the ground. 32 years old, former Navy SEAL, a man who had held his composure under fire in places most people couldn't find on a map. And he was shaking, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles had gone white, watching a 12-second clip on his phone of his daughter curled against a hallway wall while a boy twice her size drove his shoe into her ribs. Again and again. And the students standing around them didn't move, they just filmed. If you've ever watched someone you love get hurt and felt completely powerless, stay with me. This story is for you. Like this video, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. And let's begin. The text came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday morning, and Nathan Cross almost didn't see it. He was under the kitchen sink with a wrench in one hand and a flashlight clamped between his teeth, trying to stop a slow drip that had been soaking the cabinet floor for the better part of a week. The phone buzzed on the counter above him. He ignored it. It buzzed again. Then again, 3 times rapid, the way it did when someone was hitting send without finishing their thought. He pulled himself out, wiped his hands on his jeans, and looked at the screen. Dad, please, something happened at school. I need you to come right now. He was in his truck before he finished reading the third message. Crestfield Academy sat on 12 acres in the northeast corner of the city, the kind of school that had a stone gate with its name carved into it and manicured hedges running along the front fence like the place was embarrassed to be seen from the street. Nathan had driven through that gate every morning for 2 years, dropping his daughter Emma off at the circular drive while other parents in newer, cleaner cars idled behind him. He'd never felt entirely comfortable there. Emma had a partial scholarship, the result of 3 application essays she'd written herself at 11 years old, rewriting each one 4 times until she was satisfied. She was the only reason he'd ever had anything to do with a place like Crestfield. He called her twice on the drive over. No answer. The second call went straight to voicemail, and he hung up without leaving one. He parked crooked in the visitor lot, left the truck running for 30 seconds before remembering to kill the engine, and went through the front entrance at a pace that made the woman at the front desk stand up from her chair before he even reached the counter. I'm Nathan Cross. My daughter is Emma Cross, 7th grade. I need to know where she is right now. Boss. The woman, her nameplate said Deborah, looked at him the way people looked at him sometimes, like they were trying to decide if he was going to be a problem. He was 6'2", 210, and hadn't slept particularly well in about 3 years. He understood the look. Mr. Cross, if you'd like to have a seat, I don't want to sit down. Where is my daughter? Deborah reached for her phone. Let me call down to the... Is she in the nurse's office? A pause. Just a half second, but long enough. Take me there, he said. But Emma was sitting on a cot with an ice pack pressed to the left side of her face, her knees pulled up to her chest, still in her school uniform. The school nurse, a small woman named Mrs. Patil, who looked like she hadn't quite recovered from whatever had happened either, stood near the cabinet on the far wall, fussing with something that didn't need to be fussed with. Nathan sat down on the cot beside Emma, and she turned and put her face against his shoulder and didn't say anything for a long moment. He put his arm around her. He didn't say anything either. She was 12. She had her mother's eyes and his stubbornness, which was a combination that had gotten her into trouble before in smaller ways. She was the kind of kid who didn't cry easily, and she wasn't crying now, which told him more than anything else could have about how hard she was working to hold herself together. What happened? He said finally. Emma pulled back slightly. The left side of her face had a bruise developing under the cheekbone, and her lip was split at the corner. The ice pack had been covering worse. It was in the hallway after 3rd period, she said. Her voice was steady but thin, like she was conserving something. I said something to Caden Hargrove, in front of his friends. Nathan knew the name. Every parent at Crestfield knew the name Hargrove. Victor Hargrove ran half the commercial real estate in the city and had donated enough to Crestfield's new science wing that they'd put his family name on the building. What did you say? Emma looked at the floor. He was talking about Tyler Moss. Tyler's in 6th grade and he has a hard time with things, okay? And Caden was doing impressions of him in the hallway, and everyone was laughing, and I told him to stop. Nathan waited. He didn't stop, So I said it again, and I told him he was a coward for picking on someone who couldn't defend himself. She paused. That's when he grabbed my arm. Nathan kept his expression still. He'd spent years learning how to keep his expression still. Then what? He pushed me into the lockers, and then I was on the ground and he... She stopped, swallowed. He kicked me, a few times, before a teacher came. Where were the other students? They were filming it. The room was very quiet. Okay, Nathan said. Okay. He looked over at Mrs. Patil. Has anyone called the police? Mrs. Patil looked at the floor in a way that answered the question. Why not? Mr. Cross, the administration is handling this internally. There's a process. My daughter was assaulted on school property by another student. That's not an internal matter. That's a crime. He kept his voice level. Has anyone called her doctor? We've assessed her, and we don't believe... I'll take her to her doctor myself. He stood. I want to speak with the principal before we leave. Principal Diane Marsh had the office of someone who wanted you to know she'd been somewhere before coming here. Framed photographs with local politicians, a glass case with awards and commendations, fresh flowers on a desk that cost more than Nathan's refrigerator. She was in her late 50s and had the kind of practiced calm that people in administrative positions developed after years of managing other people's bad days. She stood when Nathan came in. Her expression was the right kind of concerned. Not too much, not too little. Mr. Cross, please sit down. I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am that this happened. Emma is a wonderful student, and this incident is absolutely... Where is Caden Hargrove right now? Marsh blinked. He's been removed from class while we... Has anyone called his parents? We've been in contact with the family, yes, but not the police. A pause. We believe this can be resolved through our disciplinary process. Crestfield has a very thorough... My daughter has a split lip and a bruise on her face, and multiple contusions on her ribs. She was on the ground being kicked by a boy who outweighs her by 60 pounds, while other students recorded it on their phones. Nathan sat down in the chair across from her, which somehow made the moment more serious, not less. I'm going to file a police report today. I want copies of all available security footage from the hallway where this occurred within 24 hours. And I want a written account from every staff member and student who witnessed or was involved in the incident. Marsh's practiced calm had shifted into something more careful. I understand your frustration. I'm not frustrated, Miss Marsh. I'm very clear. He stood again. If those materials aren't provided, I'll request them through the police instead. Either way is fine with me. He walked out. The parking lot was cold and bright. Nathan stood beside his truck for a moment, just breathing. Emma was beside him, her backpack over one shoulder, the ice pack still pressed to her cheek, because he'd asked her to keep it there until they reached the doctor's office. Dad? She said. Yeah. Are you okay? He looked at her. 12 years old with a bruised face, asking if he was okay. I'm fine, he said. Get in the truck. The doctor confirmed 2 bruised ribs, soft tissue swelling along the left cheekbone, and the split lip. Nothing broken. Nathan sat in the chair beside the examination table and listened to everything twice and asked questions until he understood the recovery timeline and the warning signs to watch for. Emma answered the doctor's questions in the same thin, steady voice she'd used with him. On the drive home, she fell asleep against the window with her backpack in her lap. Nathan drove with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. He thought about the hallway, about the security cameras he'd noticed on his way through the school, the one above the main entrance, the 2 bracketed to the ceiling near the administrative offices, the one he'd clocked at the far end of the corridor near the nurse's office. He thought about the students with their phones, about how many of them had already posted the video before anyone called a teacher. He thought about Caden Hargrove, who was 16 and drove himself to school in a car that cost more than most people made in a year. And he thought about Victor Hargrove, whose name was on a building at the school where his son had just beaten a 12-year-old girl on the hallway floor while everyone watched. He didn't think about any of this with particular heat. That wasn't how his mind worked when things were serious. He'd trained it out of himself over years, the immediate emotional response, the one that wanted to react before it understood. He'd seen what happened when that instinct ran without a leash. He didn't trust it. What he felt instead was something colder and more patient. He felt like he knew exactly what kind of situation he was in. He filed the police report that evening at the district precinct. The officer who took his statement, a young guy named Reardon, who kept his pen moving and his expression professionally neutral, wrote everything down, nodded at the right moments, and told Nathan he'd hear back within 48 hours. Nathan thanked him and left, already calculating what 48 hours meant in practical terms. The video had 9,000 views by midnight. Nathan found it by searching Emma's name, which he didn't particularly want to do but did anyway, because he needed to see exactly what had been recorded. There were 3 different versions posted from 3 different phones. The clearest one, filmed from roughly 15 feet away at a slight angle, showed Caden Hargrove throwing Emma against the lockers by her arm, showing her saying something back, and then Caden closing the distance fast and driving her into the ground. The sound was terrible. There was a moment in the video where you could hear Emma's sharp intake of breath, and then the particular silence that follows real pain, and Nathan watched that part once and didn't watch it again. The comments were what you'd expect. Some outrage, some gawking, a few that made him close his laptop. He made coffee he didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table for a while. Through the hallway, he could see the light under Emma's door. She was still awake. He thought about knocking and decided against it. She'd come out if she wanted to talk. Around 1 a.m, she did. She came into the kitchen in her socks and her oversized hoodie and got a glass of water and stood at the counter drinking it. Nathan waited. "They're saying stuff about me online," she said. "I know. Like I started it, like I was the one who—" She stopped. "Some of them were there. Some of the ones saying that were standing right there." "I know." Emma looked at the glass in her hand. "Does it always work like that? Where people just change what happened?" Nathan thought about how to answer that honestly. "Sometimes, when the person doing the changing has something to protect." "So Caden gets to just—" "No," Nathan said. "He doesn't." Emma looked at him. She had a bruise darkening under her eye now, vivid against her skin. "You can't fight them, Dad. Their family is—" "I'm not going to fight them." He kept his voice even. "I'm going to do this the right way. Documentation, evidence, the legal process. It's slower, but it holds." She studied him the way she sometimes did, like she was trying to figure out if he was saying what he actually believed or saying what he thought she needed to hear. "Do you believe that?" she said. "I believe it can," he said. "I'm going to make sure it does." Emma nodded slowly. She finished her water and put the glass in the sink. "Get some sleep," he said. "You too." She paused at the kitchen doorway. "Dad?" "Yeah." "The way you were in that nurse's office today, you were really calm. It scared me a little." He didn't say anything. "I mean," she said, "I felt safer, but it scared me a little." "Okay," he said. "Go to sleep, Em." She went. The end. The call came at 8:40 the next morning while Nathan was making Emma breakfast and pretending he hadn't been up since 4. The number was unfamiliar. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Cross." The voice on the other end was warm and professionally smooth, the kind of voice that had spent a long time learning how to sound like it was doing you a favor. "My name is Gerald Fitch. I'm calling on behalf of the Hargrove family. Do you have a few minutes?" Nathan moved to the far side of the kitchen. "Sure. First of all, I want to convey the family's deepest concern for your daughter's well-being. This was a terrible situation and no one is minimizing—" "What do you want, Mr. Fitch?" A brief recalibration in the voice. "The family is prepared to address this in a way that ensures Emma has everything she needs for her recovery. Medical expenses, counseling, whatever is required. And they'd like to explore a private resolution that avoids the stress of a formal legal process for everyone involved." "A settlement." "A private arrangement, yes. I'm authorized to discuss figures that I think you'd find—" "I already filed a police report." Silence. "I understand," Fitch said. "And that's completely within your rights. But I'd encourage you to consider—" "My daughter was kicked in the ribs on a school hallway floor while her classmates filmed it. I'm not interested in a private arrangement." Nathan kept his voice the same as it had been the whole conversation. Is there anything else? Another pause. When Fitch spoke again, some of the warmth had gone out of his voice. Not all of it. He was too practiced for that, but enough to tell Nathan something about the man underneath the manor. Mr. Cross, I want to make sure you have a clear picture of the process ahead of you. Legal matters like this tend to become very complicated very quickly, and the Hargrove family has significant resources to devote to their defense. I'm sure they do. I'd hate for this to become unnecessarily difficult for you and your daughter. I appreciate your concern, Nathan said. Don't call this number again. He hung up. Emma was watching him from the kitchen table over her bowl of cereal. Who was that? Nobody. He put the phone down. Eat your breakfast. He spent the morning on the phone. First, Officer Reardon, who confirmed the report had been filed and moved to the relevant division. The case had been assigned. Nathan asked who had it. Reardon gave him a name, Detective Allison Park, and a number. Park answered on the first ring, which he took as a good sign. Mr. Cross, I was going to call you this afternoon. I appreciate you seeing me sooner. I want to make sure I understand the process and what you need from me. Straightforward enough. We'll want a formal statement from Emma. She can have a parent present, and we'll be requesting the school's security footage directly. I'd request it quickly, Nathan said, if it hasn't already been reviewed and managed by the school's administration. A brief pause. Noted. Do you have reason to believe? I have reason to be careful, he said. I don't have more than that yet. He gave Park everything he had, the timeline, the 3 videos he'd found online, the doctor's report. He asked to be kept informed. Park said she would. Then he spent an hour online. He was methodical about it, the way he'd been trained to be methodical. Not looking for what he expected to find, but looking for patterns, discrepancies, anything that didn't fit. The Hargrove family was not difficult to research. Victor Hargrove was a regular presence in the city's business press. Acquisitions, development deals, charitable giving. He had 3 children. Caden was the oldest. There were 2 other mentions of Caden in news archives, a driving incident 18 months ago that had been settled quietly, and a photograph in a society piece, where he stood beside his father at a gala. Nathan started building a document, dates, names, sources, nothing that couldn't be verified. He didn't take Emma back to Crestfield that week. She didn't ask him to. She sat at the kitchen table doing her schoolwork from home, occasionally asking him to check her math, occasionally not saying anything for an hour. Nathan worked from home himself that week. He'd been doing contract security consulting for the past 14 months, enough to pay the bills, structured enough to let him be there when Emma got off the bus. Or, this week, when she didn't go to school at all. On Thursday afternoon, he went back to the school himself. Not inside. He drove the surrounding streets slowly, mapping the sight lines, noting where the external security cameras were positioned, tracing the angles. There were 3 he could identify from the exterior of the building. He wrote down their positions relative to the entrance and the wing where the incident had occurred. He was parked on the street adjacent to the school's east fence when he noticed the woman. She was standing near the front entrance talking to someone Nathan recognized as Crestfield's vice principal, a man named Greer, who'd been notably absent during Nathan's conversation with Marsh 2 days earlier. The woman looked to be around 30, dressed in a way that was expensive without calling attention to itself, dark hair pulled back. She was listening more than talking, which Nathan noticed because most people who came to talk to school administrators talked more than they listened. She glanced toward the street at some point, and for a moment her eyes landed on Nathan's truck. He didn't look away. Neither did she, for just a second, before she returned her attention to Greer. Nathan drove on. On Friday, the Hargrove family's attorney, a different one this time, not Fitch, sent a formal letter by courier to Nathan's address. He read it carefully, then read it again. It was an invitation to negotiate. It was also a very polished threat. The language was careful. The framing was sympathetic, and buried in the 3rd paragraph was a clear implication that if Nathan pursued a formal legal complaint, the Hargrove family intended to contest it aggressively, including challenging the characterization of the incident and raising questions about Emma's own behavior in the lead-up to the confrontation. Nathan sat with that for a minute. Then he folded the letter and put it in the folder where he was keeping everything, and he made a note of the law firm's name. He'd already made 3 calls that week to legal aid organizations and 2 to attorneys who handled civil cases. None of them had been encouraging, not because his case was weak, but because the cost of going up against the Hargrove family's legal apparatus was substantial, and no one wanted to take that on without certainty of recovery. He understood. He didn't like it, but he understood. What he needed was evidence. More than the videos, more than the doctor's report. He needed to understand if this was isolated or if it was part of something larger. The email arrived Saturday morning. No name, no identifying information. Just an address, a free encrypted email service, and a message that was 4 sentences long. You filed a report about what happened to your daughter at Crestfield Academy. I'm aware of your situation. I have information that may be relevant to your case. I'd like to meet. Nathan stared at it for a long time. He wrote back, "Who are you?" The response came within 20 minutes. Someone who's been paying attention to the Hargrove family for longer than you have. If you want to talk, I can meet you Monday. Public place, your choice. Nathan typed, coffee shop. The one on Meridian and 4th, 10 in the morning. The response, I'll be there. He arrived 15 minutes early and took a table near the window with a view of both the entrance and the street. He ordered coffee he didn't particularly want and waited. She came in at exactly 10. It took him a moment to place her, and then he did. The woman from outside Crestfield on Thursday. The one who'd been talking to Greer near the entrance. She was dressed differently today, more casual, and she'd left her hair down, but the way she moved was the same, deliberate, not rushed, looking at the room before she looked at the table she was heading toward. She sat down across from him and looked at him the way people looked at him when they were deciding how honest to be. "Nathan Cross," she said. It wasn't a question. "You have me at a disadvantage," he said. She put her hand across the table. "Vivian Sterling." The name hit him about 2 seconds late, which told him he needed more sleep. Vivian Sterling was the CEO of Sterling Meridian Group, a mid-size holding company that, in the last 5 years, had become considerably less mid-size. He'd seen her name in the business section. He hadn't connected the name to the woman outside the school. He shook her hand. "What were you doing at Crestfield on Thursday?" She looked at him. "You noticed that. You were watching the building. So was I." A small expression crossed her face, not quite a smile. "I was there for a leadership program I'm affiliated with. I sponsor it. Quarterly visits." She paused. "I was there the day your daughter was attacked." Nathan went still. "I was in the East Corridor," Vivian said, "coming out of a meeting with the Board Development Committee. I heard it before I saw it." She looked at the table for a moment. "By the time I got there, there were 8 or 9 students standing in the hallway. Your daughter was on the ground. The Hargrove boy was... He'd stopped by then. A teacher had come." "You saw him?" "Yes." "Did you give a statement?" "I was asked not to." She said it plainly, without embellishment. Vice Principal Greer pulled me aside within about 3 minutes and explained that the family involved was a significant partner to the school and that any public statement I made could complicate matters. He was very polite about it. Nathan looked at her carefully. "And?" "And I said I'd think about it." She met his eyes. "Then I did some thinking, and then I found out who you were and sent you that email." "Why?" She folded her hands on the table. "Because I've been auditing my company's investment portfolio, and I found 3 different executive-level connections between Sterling Meridian's partners and the Hargrove Group, connections I didn't know existed before last week." Nathan waited. "That's not inherently unusual," she said. "The city's business community is not enormous. But one of those connections involves a fund that has been quietly providing legal and financial support to families involved in civil disputes against the Hargroves, specifically support for the families not in disputes with the Hargroves, support for them to drop those disputes." The coffee had gone cold. Nathan hadn't touched it. "You're saying they've bought out previous complaints," he said. "I'm saying someone has, and I think I know whose money it is." She paused. "I'm not entirely comfortable with what I've found, and I'm less comfortable knowing that a 12-year-old girl is at home with bruised ribs while the family responsible is sending attorneys with settlement letters." Nathan studied her for a moment. He was good at reading people, had spent years in environments where reading people wrong had consequences. And what he read in Vivian Sterling was someone who was angry and trying to be careful about it. He recognized that combination. "What do you want?" he said. "To share what I've found and to understand what you're planning to do with it." "Why does it matter what I plan?" She looked at him directly. "Because if you're planning to walk away or take the settlement, I've had a fairly unpleasant week for nothing. And if you're planning to fight this, I might be able to help." Nathan looked out the window at the street. A couple walked past with a stroller. A man in a delivery jacket checked his phone on the corner. Ordinary Friday morning world. "I'm going to need everything you have in writing," he said, "with source documentation." "I can do that. And I'm going to need you to be willing to give a witness statement about what you saw in that hallway. Not a corporate statement. Your name, your account, under oath if it comes to that." She didn't hesitate. "Yes." He looked back at her. "Then we can talk." He got home at noon. Emma was at the kitchen table with her laptop, working on something. She looked up when he came in. "Where were you?" "Meeting," he said. She looked at him the way she sometimes did, the same look her mother used to give him, so like she could tell there was more and was deciding whether to ask for it. "Is it about the case?" she said. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Yeah. Are you making progress?" He thought about Vivian Sterling across the coffee shop table, about the folder she'd pulled from her bag, printed pages, email chains, financial records with key figures circled in red pen, about the expression on her face when she talked about it, the careful anger in it. "I think so," he said. "It's early, but I think so." Emma nodded. She looked back at her laptop, then back at him. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." "I don't want to go back to school on Monday." "Not yet." "Okay. But I don't want to just wait around either. I want to know what's happening." He considered that. "I can do that. I'll tell you what I can when I know it." She seemed to think about whether that was enough. "Okay," she said finally. She went back to her work. Nathan got up and went to his desk in the corner of the living room and opened his laptop. He pulled up the folder he'd been building, dates, names, incident reports, contact information, and added a new section at the top. Vivian Sterling, CEO, Sterling Meridian Group. Eyewitness. Monday, East Corridor, Crestfield Academy. Below it he wrote, 3 exec connections to Hargrove Group via undisclosed fund. Possible pattern of suppressed complaints. Begin tracing. He sat back and looked at what he had. It wasn't much yet. A police report that might go nowhere. A doctor's report that documented damage, but not intent. 3 cell phone videos that showed what happened but couldn't prove a pattern. A corporate executive who'd seen something and was willing to talk about it, at some professional cost to herself, for reasons that might hold and might not. It wasn't much. But it was a start. And Nathan Cross had started from less before. Outside the window, the afternoon light was shifting. Emma was still at the table, working quietly, her bruised face bent over her screen with the same focused expression she'd had since she was old enough to read. She was trying to act like things were normal. So was he. It occurred to him that they were both probably worse at it than they thought they were. He turned back to his screen and kept working. The documents Vivian sent over Sunday evening were 53 pages long. Nathan sat at his desk after Emma went to bed and read through all of them twice. He had a yellow legal pad beside him, and he took notes in his tight, economical handwriting, the kind of handwriting that didn't waste space. By the time he finished, he had covered 4 pages and his coffee had gone cold twice. What Vivian had put together wasn't a smoking gun. It was something more complicated and, in some ways, more useful. It was a pattern. Fund transfers routed through a corporate entity called Meridian Capital Holdings, which was not affiliated with Sterling Meridian despite the similar name, a fact she had flagged with a red asterisk and a note in the margin that said, "Not mine, but easily confused, possibly intentional." 4 civil complaints against members of the Hargrove family or Hargrove Group subsidiaries over the past 7 years. All 4 had been dropped. 2 had been refiled and dropped again. The complainants in 3 of the 4 cases had received payments that were structured to appear as unrelated business transactions. The 4th case involved a student. A 14-year-old boy named Marcus Webb, 3 years ago, at a different private school where Caden Hargrove had briefly been enrolled before transferring to Crestfield. The case had been filed by Marcus's parents, gone quiet within 6 weeks, and the family had subsequently relocated to another state. Nathan circled Marcus Webb's name and wrote the date beside it. He called Detective Park at 8 the next morning. "I have additional documentation I'd like to share with you," he said. "Financial records and what appears to be a pattern of suppressed complaints related to the Hargrove family. I didn't compile this. It came from a third party who's willing to cooperate with the investigation." Park was quiet for a moment. "How solid is the source?" "Solid enough. She's a corporate executive with access to financial records that I wouldn't be able to get on my own. She's also a direct eyewitness to the incident involving my daughter. She hasn't given a statement yet." "She'll give one. She told me directly she's willing to." Nathan paused. "There's also a prior incident. A student named Marcus Webb, 3 years ago, different school. I'd like to know if a complaint was ever formally filed and what happened to it." He heard the sound of a pen on paper. "I'll look into it." "I'd appreciate it if you looked into it quickly. The longer this sits, the more time the other side has to manage what's available." "Mr. Cross," Park's voice was patient but not unkind, "I understand your concern. I want you to understand that this case is active and I'm treating it seriously, but I also need you to let me do my job." "I know," he said. "I'm letting you do your job. I'm also doing mine." A pause. "What is your job exactly in this context?" "Making sure my daughter doesn't become case number 5 on that list," he said, and hung up. Vivian called him that afternoon. He was in the backyard with Emma, who had decided she needed to clean out the garden bed along the back fence, a project she'd started twice before and abandoned, but today she seemed to need something to do with her hands, and Nathan wasn't going to tell her otherwise. He stepped inside to take the call. "Did you get everything?" Vivian asked. "Read it twice. It's good work." "It's not complete. There are gaps in the fund transfer records. Some of it was routed through a shell structure I don't have full access to. I've asked my financial team to keep digging, but I wanted to be upfront that what I sent you is partial." "Partial is more than I had." He leaned against the kitchen counter. "The Marcus Webb case. Did you find anything beyond what's in the documents?" "I made some calls. The family moved to Portland. The mother she's not willing to talk. At least not yet." A pause. "I don't blame her." "Neither do I." He thought for a moment. "Your investigator, the one you mentioned." "I haven't hired one yet. I've been researching. I have 2 names I trust." "Before you do that, I want to talk to you about the approach. Hiring an investigator changes the situation. It creates a paper trail. It signals intent. And if the Hargroves are monitoring people who are moving against them, it puts a flag on you." She was quiet for a second. "You think they're monitoring?" "I think they've had a long time to develop that reflex. The way Greer moved on you within 3 minutes of the incident, that's not improvised. That's practiced." He chose his words carefully. "I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying let's talk about sequencing before you make a move that announces what you're doing." Vivian was quiet for a moment, and he had the impression she was recalibrating something. "Okay," she said. "When can you meet?" "Tomorrow. Same place? I'll be there at 10. He went back outside. Emma had gotten the dead growth cleared from about a third of the bed and was sitting on her heels looking at what was left, her hands dirty, her expression unreadable. "You don't have to do the whole thing today," he said. "I know." She didn't move. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Yeah." "That meeting yesterday, was it a woman?" He looked at her. "What makes you ask that?" Emma shrugged in a way that meant she'd already figured it out. "You got home and you looked not happy exactly, but less like you were carrying something. You only look like that when you've talked to someone who actually listened to you." She pulled a clump of dead roots from the soil. "We don't know many people like that." He thought about how to respond and decided the simplest answer was the right one. "Her name is Vivian. She's a CEO. She was at the school when it happened, and she's willing to help." Emma turned that over. "Is she trustworthy?" "I think so. I'm being careful." "Okay." She went back to the garden. Then, "Is she nice?" "I don't know her well enough to say. Emma made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. You're going to meet her again tomorrow, aren't you? It wasn't a question, so he didn't answer it like one. He crouched down and started pulling roots from the section beside her. Vivian was already there when he arrived, which he noted because he'd come 10 minutes early. She had a coffee and a folder on the table and was writing something in a small notebook with the focused expression of someone who was thinking harder than they looked. She looked up when he sat down. I found something else last night. He put his jacket over the back of the chair. Tell me. 3 years before Marcus Webb, there was another complaint. A teacher, a woman who was the head of the arts department at Crestfield. She filed a harassment complaint against the school's administration. The details are vague in what I could access, but the timing lines up with a large Hargrove family donation to the school's endowment. Vivian slid a printed page across the table. She resigned 6 weeks after filing. No settlement on record, but she got a very generous severance for someone who technically resigned. Nathan looked at the page. The teacher's name was Patricia Sorrell. Do you have contact information? I have a current address. She teaches art at a community center in the Westfield district now. Vivian paused. I haven't reached out. I wasn't sure if I should. Not yet, he said. Let me think about the sequence. He looked at the page again. You're building a picture of how they operate. Each time something threatens them, the same playbook. Isolation, payment, silence. The variation is in how they approach the individual based on what they have to lose. Which means they've been doing this long enough to have a playbook. Right. He looked up. The question is whether any of these people are willing to step back into it. The Webb family moved across the country. Sorrell took a significant career step down. Those are people who made a decision to be done. And you're asking them to be not done. I'm asking them to consider whether being done actually protected them, or whether it just postponed something. He kept his voice level. That's a hard conversation, and I'm not sure all of them will have it, but one of them might. Vivian wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. She had a way of doing that when she was thinking. Nathan had noticed it the day before, too. Like she needed something solid. Can I ask you something? She said. Go ahead. The way you're approaching this, the documentation, the sequencing, all of it. You've done this kind of thing before, not corporate investigations. She looked at him directly. Something else. He didn't answer immediately. I spent 11 years in the Navy. Part of that was intelligence work, analysis, pattern recognition, operational planning. That's what this feels like. That's what most things feel like to me, he said. It's not always the right tool. Is it the right tool now? He thought about Emma in the backyard, pulling dead roots from the garden with her bruised face and her careful hands. Yeah, he said. I think it is. Vivian nodded slowly. Okay, so what's the sequence? He laid it out for her. Detective Park was working the criminal side, but criminal cases against wealthy defendants with political connections moved slowly and could be managed. What they needed in parallel was an independent evidentiary foundation, documentation that didn't depend on the police investigation and couldn't be reached by whatever legal pressure the Hargroves might apply to the official process. That meant financial records, communications, a reliable chain of prior incidents they could put in front of a journalist or a civil attorney, or if it came to that, a legislative oversight body. The security footage from the school, Nathan said. Have you had any contact with the administration about that? Greer called me Thursday afternoon. He was very friendly. Something shifted in Vivian's expression. He asked if I'd had time to reconsider my position. What did you tell him? I told him I'd been very busy. She said it with a dryness that wasn't quite a smile. He's going to call again. When he does, let him. Be vague. Don't tell him where you actually stand. Nathan looked at her. I know that's uncomfortable. It's fine. I've been in board meetings. She picked up her pen again. The footage. What are you thinking? The police have formally requested it, but there are two things that concern me. First, between the incident and the request, the school had approximately 72 hours to review what was on those cameras. Second, the Hargrove family has, at various points, donated to the school's infrastructure fund. I'd like to know if that infrastructure includes the security system. Vivian stared at him. You think they control the cameras? I think it's worth finding out who installed the system, who has administrative access to the footage, and what the school's data retention policy actually says versus what it says on paper. He leaned forward slightly. Can your team research the school's vendor contracts without raising flags? Probably. It's public record at the district level. She was writing in her notebook now. Give me 2 days. There's one more thing. He hesitated, which was rare for him. The independent investigator you mentioned. I've changed my mind about the timing. I think you should move forward with it, but the assignment needs to be structured carefully. Nothing that connects to the school or the incident directly. I want them looking at the financial structure of the fund that's been managing the payouts. The shell company, who set it up, who controls it, and whether there are other transactions that don't fit the visible business purpose. Vivian put her pen down. That's a significant expansion from where we started. I know. If we pull on that thread and there's more on the other end than a school bullying case, then we find out what's on the other end, he said, and we decide what to do with it. She looked at him for a long moment. Most people would take the settlement, Nathan. He didn't answer right away. Outside the coffee shop window, the morning was gray and ordinary. A woman walking a dog, a teenager on a bike moving too fast through a crosswalk, a delivery driver arguing with a parking meter. Most people haven't spent 11 years learning that the fastest exit from a bad situation isn't always the exit that holds, he said. Vivian held his gaze. Then she nodded and picked her pen back up. The call from Gerald Fitch came 3 days later. Not to Nathan this time, but to Detective Park. Park told him about it in a phone call that afternoon, her voice carrying a careful neutrality that Nathan had come to recognize as her version of something stronger. The Hargrove family's legal team has contacted our department, she said. They've expressed concern about the scope of the investigation and requested clarification about whether additional parties are being investigated beyond the original incident. In other words, they know someone is digging, Nathan said. In other words, how? I don't know, but I want you to be aware that we may have a timeline problem. If they're monitoring the investigation, they may accelerate their own document management. I've already thought about that. He paused. Is the footage request being handled through the department or through the school directly? We sent a formal request to the administration. We haven't received the material yet. Nathan was quiet for 2 seconds. How long has it been? 8 days. I see. He kept his voice even. Is there a mechanism to escalate that request? There is. I've already initiated it. Another pause. Mr. Cross, I want to be direct with you. The political dimension of this case is not simple. I'm doing my job. But I want you to understand that I'm doing it in an environment where not everyone above me is equally invested in the outcome. It was the most candid thing she'd said to him. He appreciated it. I understand, he said. Thank you for telling me. He called Vivian immediately after and told her what Park had said. She listened without interrupting. They know, she said when he finished. They know something. They may not know how much. What do we do? We accelerate. He'd already thought it through. The investigator, I need you to move on that today, not this week. I want the shell company analysis as far along as possible before they start managing their exposure. And I need you to make contact with Patricia Sorrell. A pause. Me? Not you? You're a woman. She filed a harassment complaint against an administration that was protecting a powerful man's interests. You'll get further than I will. He thought about it. Be honest with her about what you're doing and why. Don't make promises you can't keep. If she says no, respect it. And if she says yes, then we have a witness who's been living with this for 6 years, and that changes the shape of what we're building. Vivian took a breath. Okay. One more thing. He hesitated again, and again it was unusual enough that she seemed to notice. Whatever you find in those vendor contracts, the security system company, can you get it to me before you share it anywhere else, including your own legal team? Why? He chose his words carefully. Because if the footage has been altered or erased, I want to know about it before the people who erased it know that I know. And if your attorneys are aware of it, there's a documentation requirement that changes what we can do with the information. Vivian went quiet for a moment that was longer than her usual pauses. You're asking me to sit on information that might be material to a criminal investigation. I'm asking you to sit on it for 48 hours, he said, so we can understand what it means before we're required to announce that we understand it. He could almost hear her deciding. 48 hours, she said. That's everything I can give you. That's all I need. He was making dinner when Emma came into the kitchen and sat on the counter the way she used to do when she was small, which she'd grown out of years ago and apparently grown back into when she needed something. School wants to know when I'm coming back, she said. What did you tell them? I haven't answered. Mom used to say I avoid things by not answering. Nathan turned the heat down on the pan. What do you want to do? Emma looked at her socks. I don't want to go back to a place where that can happen and everyone just watches. She said it without drama, just flatly, like she was reading something off a page. But I also don't want to just hide here forever. You're not hiding. It kind of feels like it. He turned around and leaned against the counter across from her. Going back is your call. I'll support whatever you decide. He paused. But I want you to decide it because of what you want, not because you're trying to prove something to people who don't deserve the proof. Emma looked at him. Is that what you think I'm doing? I think you might be, a little. She was quiet for a while. Outside, the neighbor's dog started barking at something and then stopped. The pan on the stove made small sounds. Tell me something about Mom, Emma said. It was something she did occasionally, not often, but sometimes, when the distance between where they were and where they wanted to be got too wide. Nathan thought for a moment. First week after she was diagnosed, she made a spreadsheet, color-coded, every appointment, every specialist, every medication schedule. She spent 2 hours on it. He picked up the spatula again. And then she closed the laptop and said, I'm going to be really bad at this. And she was. She cried at the wrong moments and yelled at nurses and once fell asleep during a consultation and was mortified for a week. He turned back to the stove. But she kept going anyway. Emma absorbed this. She never told me that. She always seemed like she had it together. She didn't. She was just still going. Emma sat with that for a bit. Then she said, I'll go back Monday. Nathan kept his attention on the pan. Okay. But if Caden Hargrove shows up, he won't. He's been suspended pending the investigation. If he comes back, then we deal with that when it happens. He plated the food. Come eat. Emma slid off the counter. She stood beside him for a second, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching, before she moved to sit at the table. She didn't say anything else, neither did he, but the kitchen felt less empty than it had an hour ago, and Nathan took that for what it was worth and didn't ask it to be more than that. But the vendor contract information came from Vivian the following evening, a single email with a PDF attached and no message in the body. He opened it. The school's security system had been installed 4 years ago by a company called Castellan Systems, LLC. The contract included provisions for cloud storage of footage, administrative access credentials, and remote system management. The point of contact listed on the Crestfield side for system access was not an IT administrator or a facilities manager. It was Gerald Fitch. Nathan read the name twice. He set the document down, picked it up again, and read the whole contract through from the beginning. Gerald Fitch, the same Gerald Fitch who had called Nathan the morning after Emma was attacked with a settlement offer and a veiled threat, was listed as the authorized administrator for Crestfield Academy's security camera infrastructure. His title on the contract was Corporate Partner Liaison, Hargrove Group. Nathan stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Detective Park's direct line. It was 9:40 at night. She answered anyway. I have something you need to see tonight, he said. I'm sorry for the time. What is it? The security system at Crestfield is administered by a Hargrove Group employee, the same employee who called me the morning after the incident to offer a settlement. He kept his voice controlled. I think you may want to issue an emergency preservation order before morning. There was a pause on the other end. When Park spoke again, some of the professional neutrality had shifted into something more alert. Send me everything you have, she said, right now. He did. He sat at his desk afterward and thought about the shape of what they were dealing with. Not a family protecting a violent kid, or not only that. Something older. Something that had learned over years exactly which strings to pull and when to pull them. He thought about Emma going back to school Monday morning. He thought about Marcus Webb somewhere in Portland and Patricia Sorrell teaching art to adults in the Westfield district and 4 complaints that had gone nowhere. He thought about the fact that Gerald Fitch had probably already reviewed every second of hallway footage and made his decisions about what stayed and what disappeared. And he thought, not for the first time, but more clearly than before, that this was no longer a case about one afternoon in a school hallway. This had roots, and you couldn't pull something with roots by tugging at the surface. You had to go down. The emergency preservation order went through at 6:40 the next morning. Nathan knew because Park called him to confirm it, her voice carrying the specific flatness of someone who had worked through the night and was running on caffeine and the kind of focus that doesn't need sleep to sustain itself. The order had been issued to Castellan Systems, LLC directly, bypassing Crestfield's administration entirely. A decision that required Park to go 2 levels above her immediate supervisor at 11 o'clock at night and make a case that Nathan suspected had not been easy to make. "The footage is preserved," she said. "All of it, from 14 days prior to the incident through present. Castellan has been instructed not to modify, transfer, or delete any files under legal penalty." What about what Fitch may have already accessed? That's the question. She paused. Castellan's system logs access history, every login, every file viewed, every download. We've requested those logs as part of the same order. Another pause. Heavier. If you went in and removed something after the incident, the log will show the access. It won't show what was removed, but it will show that something was. Nathan sat with that. "When will you have the logs?" 48 hours by their legal obligation, possibly sooner. Park's voice dropped slightly. "Mr. Cross, I want to be clear with you. This development, the Hargrove employee with admin access, this changes the classification of what we're looking at. This is no longer a juvenile assault matter." "I know. It becomes obstruction of justice if that access was used to interfere with evidence. Potentially conspiracy, depending on what the financial records show." She stopped. "I need to know everything you have. Not just what you've shared. Everything. The financial documents, the prior cases, all of it." He'd been waiting for this conversation. "I'll come in this morning. 9 o'clock. I'll be there." He got Emma up at 7, made her eggs she ate half of, and drove her to school. She sat in the passenger seat with her backpack in her lap and her eyes on the window and didn't say much. When he pulled into the Crestfield Circle, she sat for an extra second before opening the door. "I'll be okay," she said, like she was telling herself as much as him. "I know you will." She got out. He watched her walk through the entrance, straight-backed, unhurried, the bruise on her cheek faded to yellow-green at the edges. And he waited until the door closed behind her before he pulled away. Park's office was on the 3rd floor of the district's main investigative building, a room that looked like every other investigative office Nathan had ever been in. Stacked files, a whiteboard with things half erased, a window that hadn't been cleaned recently. She was younger than he'd pictured from her voice. Early 40s, probably, with reading glasses on the desk she hadn't put on yet, and the specific tired alertness of someone good at her job who was currently being tested by circumstances outside her job. He put everything on her desk. The complete file Vivian had sent him, the vendor contract, his own documentation from the start, dates, names, incident timeline, the letter from Fitch's colleague, all of it organized and indexed the way he'd been trained to organize field intelligence. Park went through it without speaking. She had a yellow highlighter, and she used it sparingly, which told him she was reading carefully rather than skimming for headlines. After 40 minutes, she set the last page down and looked up. "The Webb case," she said. "You have financial records showing a payment to a company registered in Delaware. That company dissolves 14 months after the Webb family drops the complaint and relocates. Same structure, different name reappears 18 months later. I have 2 more payments that match the pattern." "The Sorrell case?" "No financial records yet, but the timing of her severance relative to the Hargrove donation is documented in the school's publicly filed financial disclosures." Park tapped the end of her highlighter against the desk. "Have you made contact with either of them? Webb, Sorrell?" "Sorrell, not me personally. I asked Vivian Sterling to reach out. I haven't had a full report back yet." Park looked at him steadily. "The Sterling involvement concerns me slightly." "Why?" Because she's a corporate executive with her own exposure in this. If it ever comes to a hearing, defense attorneys will argue she had a motive to construct a narrative that deflects from her own company's ties to the Hargrove Group. Nathan had thought about this. Her company's ties are financial partnerships she didn't structure and didn't know about. She disclosed them voluntarily when she could have buried them. He held Park's gaze. She's been the one taking risks here, not minimizing them. I believe you. I'm telling you what they'll argue. Park opened a desk drawer and pulled out a folder of her own. I ran the Castellan Systems ownership. It's a subsidiary of a holding company called Grayfield Infrastructure Partners. Grayfield has 3 shareholders. One of them is a trust managed by an attorney named Samuel Cross. No relation to you, I checked, who represents, among other clients, the Hargrove family. The room was quiet. So the Hargroves own the security company that holds the school's footage, Nathan said. They own a partial interest in the company that owns the company. It's layered, but yes, that's what it amounts to. Park closed the folder. This is considerably larger than I explained to my supervisor last night. Are you going to have a problem with that? She looked at him for a long moment. No, she said, but I'm going to need more support, and getting it means bringing people into this who I don't entirely control. That's a risk. Everything from here is a risk, he said. Yes. She started stacking the documents into a pile. I'm going to need originals of everything you've shown me, or certified copies where the originals are digital. I'm also going to need a formal interview with Ms. Sterling on the record within the next 72 hours. I'll arrange it. And Nathan, she stopped stacking, I need you to be careful. The level we're now operating at, these people have resources that extend well beyond lawyers and public relations. I'm not saying that to scare you. I'm saying it so you make good decisions about your movements and your daughter's safety. He nodded. I know. I don't think you entirely know, she said, not unkindly, but you'll have a better picture by the end of this week. He called Vivian from the parking lot. Park needs you on record within 72 hours, he said. Formal interview. Can you do that? Yes. She didn't hesitate. I spoke with Patricia Sorrell last night. He straightened. And it took me an hour to get her to stop saying she had nothing to share and start talking about what actually happened. Vivian's voice was careful, controlled, but there was something underneath it. She was the head of arts at Crestfield for 9 years. One of her students, a 16-year-old girl, came to her about an incident involving Caden Hargrove. Not a physical assault, something else. The girl was scared, and Sorrell reported it to Marsh. Nathan said nothing. He was very still. Marsh called Victor Hargrove before she called anyone else. That's what Sorrell says. 2 days later, Sorrell was called into a meeting with Marsh and 2 members of the school board and told that the student had recanted and that Sorrell had mishandled the report by failing to follow procedure. Vivian paused. She tried to file through the district's independent reporting channel. The complaint was returned to her marked administrative error. She retained an attorney. 6 weeks later, she resigned with a severance that required a non-disclosure agreement. What does the NDA cover? Anything related to her employment at Crestfield, any student matters, and any conduct by school administration, board members, or, and this is the specific language she quoted to me, any individuals in partnership with the school. They scripted it that broadly. Yes. Another pause. She cried, Nathan. She sat in her apartment and talked to me for 40 minutes and cried 3 times. She said she'd spent 6 years being ashamed of signing that agreement. He looked at the building across the street. An ordinary office building, people moving behind glass, the ordinary machinery of a Tuesday. Is she willing to talk to Park? She wants to think about it. The NDAs don't cover criminal matters. She can talk to law enforcement without violating it. He thought for a moment. Can you send me the name of the attorney who represented her when she signed it? She remembers his name. She said he was the one who told her an NDA in exchange for severance was standard and that she should sign. I'd like to know who recommended that attorney to her. Silence on the other end. Then, you think the attorney was theirs? I think it's worth knowing. He heard Vivian take a slow breath. I'll find out. One more thing. He chose the words deliberately. I need you to pull back from any public communication about any of this. No board meetings where this comes up. No conversations with your executive team about the specifics. Tell as few people as possible what you're doing and why. You think I'm being watched? I think the fact that Fitch called Park's department, that tells me they have visibility into something. Maybe the police communication, maybe something else. Until I know which, I want the footprint small. He paused. I know this is uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable, she said, and her voice was honest in a way that he'd come to expect from her. No performance of toughness, no pretending the situation was less than it was. But okay. Thank you, Vivian. A brief pause. You never call me by my first name. I've been calling you by your first name. In your head. Out loud you avoid it. She said it without accusation, just observation. It's fine, I just noticed. He didn't have a good response to that, so he let it go. I'll call you tonight. The second attack on Emma happened on a Wednesday. Not at school. Not by Caden Hargrove, who was still under suspension. It was 3 blocks from the school at 3:20 in the afternoon. 2 boys Nathan didn't recognize. Older, not Crestfield students, who approached her on the sidewalk and told her, in specific terms, to tell her father to drop whatever he was doing or things were going to get difficult for people she cared about. Emma didn't scream. She didn't run. According to what she told Nathan afterward, she'd looked at them both for a few seconds and then said, "I'm going to remember your faces," and walked away at a pace that was faster than normal, but not running. She called Nathan from the corner 2 blocks later. Her voice, on the phone, was controlled and thin, the same way it had been in the nurse's office. He was in the truck within 4 minutes and with her in 12. She was sitting on a bus bench, backpack between her feet, watching the street. When he pulled up and got out, she stood up and said, "I'm okay," before he could ask. He did a visual check anyway, her face, her arms, the way she was standing. No physical contact had been made. He made himself slow down. "Describe them," he said. She did. She was precise. Heights, builds, clothing. One had a small scar through his left eyebrow. The other had a specific logo on his jacket that she described from memory with an accuracy that made something in Nathan's chest tighten in a way he couldn't entirely categorize. His 12-year-old daughter had just been approached on a public street by 2 men trying to intimidate her into silence, and she had memorized their faces. He got her in the truck and called Park from the driver's seat while Emma sat very still in the passenger seat looking at her hands. "They're escalating," he told Park. "I know, this changes your daughter's exposure. I want to recommend—" "She's not going anywhere." He said it quietly, but there was no movement in it. "We're not pulling back." "Nathan, this is no longer a civil matter or even a school investigation. These people are intimidating a minor on a public street. That's criminal harassment, potentially worse. I need you to find out who those 2 men are." He gave Park the descriptions Emma had provided. "And I need to know how they knew Emma's route home." That landed. Park went quiet for a second. "They knew which school," she said slowly, "and the dismissal time, and the route, which means they were watching or they were told." He kept his voice even, but barely. "Either way, someone has had eyes on my daughter, and I want to know who and for how long." He hung up and sat for a moment with both hands on the wheel. Emma was watching him. "What happens now?" she said. He looked at her. "Now I drive you home. You're not walking alone for a while." "For how long?" "Until I say it's okay." He started the truck. "I'm sorry, Emma." "Why are you apologizing?" "Because you're 12, and this shouldn't be your problem." She looked back at her hands. "It's okay." "It's not." "No," she said. "I know it's not. I said it's okay like people do when they don't know what else to say." She folded her hands together. "I'm scared." He looked at her. "I know." "Are you scared?" He thought about answering the way he usually did, measuring the response, keeping the load-bearing parts to himself. But she'd just stood on a street corner and memorized the faces of 2 men trying to frighten her. She'd earned the honest answer. "Yes," he said. "A little." Emma nodded like that was actually more reassuring than no would have been. "Okay," she said. "Then let's just keep going." He pulled into traffic. That evening, Vivian came to his apartment for the first time. He'd called her after Emma was in bed, earlier than usual, and Emma hadn't fought it, which told him something about how the day had cost her, and told her what had happened. Vivian had gone quiet in a way that was different from her thinking quiet. This was something else. "I'm coming over," she said. I'm coming over. Text me the address." She arrived 40 minutes later with a folder under one arm and a coffee tray from somewhere that was probably still open at 9:30. She looked at him when he opened the door, and he looked back, and neither of them said anything for a second. "How is she?" Vivian said. "Asleep, I think." He stepped back to let her in. She was calmer than I was. That's the part I can't entirely get comfortable with. Vivian set the coffee on the kitchen table and sat down. She looked around the apartment, not intrusively, just the way people took in a space they hadn't been in before. There were books on the coffee table, Emma's homework spread across one end of the dining table, a framed photograph on the wall near the hall. She looked at it briefly, then looked back at Nathan. "The intimidation today. They want you to feel like Emma is never safe," she said. "That's what that was designed to do. Whether or not they ever intended to touch her, the goal was to make you feel like the threat was unlimited." "I know what it was designed to do." He sat across from her. "It worked anyway, to some degree. I'm not going to pretend it didn't." "That's honest?" "What's in the folder?" She opened it. The investigator's preliminary report came back today, 12 hours earlier than I expected, which means she found something significant enough to move fast. She slid the top page across. The shell company, Meridian Capital Holdings, was incorporated 8 years ago in Delaware. The registered agent is a law firm that represents 17 other entities, most of which are unremarkable. But one of them, this one here, she pointed, is a company called Sentinel Education Partners. Nathan looked at the page. "What does Sentinel do?" "Officially, it provides consulting services to private K-12 institutions. Governance review, administrative support, financial advisory." She paused. "In practice, based on what the investigator found, it facilitates the movement of money between Hargrove Group entities and private schools in at least 4 states. Crestfield is one of them. 3 others are named here." She tapped the page. "In each case, the school receives significant donations or endowment contributions from Hargrove-affiliated funds within 18 months of a complaint or legal dispute involving a Hargrove family member being quietly resolved." Nathan read the page twice. 4 states. "How many schools?" 7, going back 11 years. He set the page down. "This isn't one family protecting one violent kid. This is infrastructure." "Yes." Vivian's voice was flat in the way voices got when the facts were too heavy for emphasis. "They built a system. Relationships with school administrations, financial ties that create dependency, and a mechanism to manage anyone who causes problems. And they've been running it for over a decade." He looked up at her. "Does the investigator have documentation on all 7? "On 4 of them, yes. The other 3 are preliminary, enough to follow up, but not enough to certify yet." She pushed another page across. She also found something that wasn't in the original scope. A city council member named Harold Vance. His re-election campaign received just under $50,000 through 3 separate PAC contributions that trace back through 2 layers to Hargrove Group entities. "What committee does Vance sit on?" Vivian met his eyes. "Public safety and law enforcement oversight." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "That's how they get early warning," he said. "That's how they knew Park was building a case before Park had told anyone above her immediate division." "That's what I think, yes." He pushed his chair back and stood up, which wasn't something he did when he was thinking calmly. He walked to the window, looked at the street below. Quiet, ordinary, the same ordinary world that kept existing around all of this. And then turned back around. "How confident is your investigator in this?" "Confident enough to put it in writing. She sent me a separate note saying she's flagging this as the most significant thing she's turned up in 12 years of financial investigation work." Vivian paused. "She also said she wants to make sure we understand the kind of attention this material might attract if it becomes known that we have it. She thinks we're at risk. She thinks we should be careful." Another pause. "I think she's right." He came back to the table and sat down. He looked at the documents spread between them. Weeks of work, other people's years of silence, a 12-year-old girl's bruised face, and a pattern that stretched across 11 years and 7 schools, and a city council member who answered to the wrong people. Park needs this tonight, he said. I know. Vivian had already recapped her pen. There's one more thing. She picked up the last page in the folder. Patricia Sorrell called me this afternoon, after what happened to Emma. She'd seen something about it on social media. Apparently someone posted about a girl being threatened near Crestfield. She handed Nathan the page. She wants to talk to Detective Park. He looked at the page. It was a short handwritten note. Sorrell had faxed it to Vivian's office, which struck him as something from another era, and also as something deliberate, a woman who had learned to be careful about digital records. The handwriting was small and slightly uneven, and the note said, in full, I should have done this 6 years ago. Tell me when and where. He read it twice. She's scared, Vivian said quietly. I know. But she's doing it anyway. He set the note down carefully, like it was something that could break. Yeah, he said, she is. They worked for another hour at the kitchen table, organizing the investigator's report, preparing what Park would need for a formal briefing, identifying the sequence of moves they could control and the ones they couldn't. Vivian was methodical in a way that surprised him the first time he saw it, and didn't surprise him anymore. She thought in structures, in dependencies, in what had to happen before something else could happen. It was different from the way he thought, but it fit alongside it without friction, which wasn't something he'd experienced often. Around 11, she started gathering the documents back into the folder. My board is going to find out what I've been doing, she said, not looking up. Probably soon. I've been careful, but the meeting with Park will be on record and the company's name will come up. What will they do? Some of them will try to distance the company from the investigation. 3 of my board members have investment ties to real estate development in this city, and 2 of those have done business with Hargrove Group entities. She straightened the papers. There's going to be pressure. Will you hold? She looked up at him. The question sat there for a second, honest and unadorned. Yes, she said. I'll hold. He believed her. He wasn't entirely sure he should, given that he'd known her for 2 weeks, and the history of people holding under this kind of pressure was not encouraging, but he believed her anyway. You should go, he said. It's late. She stood and picked up the folder. Tell Emma I hope she's okay. I will. She walked to the door, then stopped and turned back as if she'd thought of something and was deciding whether to say it. He waited. The photograph on your wall, she said. In the hallway. Is that Emma's mother? Yeah. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't fully read. She looked like someone who laughed easily. She did, he said. Until she didn't. Vivian nodded once, like that was the right answer to something, even if neither of them knew what. Then she left, and he locked the door behind her and stood in the quiet apartment for a while before going to check on Emma. Emma was asleep, or close to it. She shifted when he looked in, and one hand moved on the pillow, but she didn't wake. He stood in the doorway for longer than was strictly necessary, watching her breathe, the bruise on her cheek invisible in the dark. Then he went back to his desk, opened his laptop, and started preparing the briefing document for Park. The clock on the screen read 11:47 p.m., the same time her text had come in, weeks ago, while he was under a kitchen sink with a flashlight between his teeth. He hadn't slept a full night since. He wasn't going to sleep tonight either, but he had more than he'd had the day before, and more than he'd had the week before that, and each increment felt like ground taken and held. The only kind of progress he'd ever trusted. Not the kind that announced itself, but the kind that accumulated quietly, until one day you looked back and the distance was real. He typed the first line of the briefing and kept going. Park called at 7:15 the following morning with a voice that told Nathan she hadn't gone home. The briefing document you sent, I shared it with the deputy chief last night, at midnight. She paused in a way that communicated how that conversation had gone. We're convening a multi-agency task force this morning. State Financial Crimes Unit, federal coordination pending, and a separate investigative team that doesn't route through the standard district chain. Nathan understood what that last part meant. Because of Vance. Because we don't know how far the contact extends. Until we do, we're treating the department's standard communication channels as potentially compromised at the supervisory level. Another pause. I want you to know this is not a position I've been in before. In 15 years. I know. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just keep doing what you're doing. She cleared her throat. The Castellan logs came in overnight. 41 separate access events on the hallway footage files between the date of the incident and the date our preservation order took effect. 38 of those were logged under Gerald Fitch's admin credentials. Nathan was silent for a moment. What did he do to the files? That's what we're determining. The logs show access and export commands. We're working with a forensic team to recover what was exported and whether any files were deleted from the cloud storage prior to our order. She paused. Initial analysis suggests at least 2 camera angles were removed from the archive. We may be able to recover them from backup servers that Fitch didn't have access to. Backup servers he didn't know existed. Castellan maintains them off-site, apparently as a liability protection measure. Their own attorneys advised them not to disclose the backup system to clients. A dry note entered Park's voice. It may be the most useful piece of corporate self-interest I've encountered in this investigation. After he hung up, Nathan sat at his kitchen table with his second coffee going cold and thought about Gerald Fitch, reviewing footage of Emma on the hallway floor and making calculations about what to keep and what to erase. He sat with that for about 30 seconds before he made himself move on, because sitting with it longer wasn't going to help anything, and he knew what it would do to him if he let it. He called Vivian. "Task force," he said when she picked up. "Multi-agency. They're going around the standard chain because of Vance." Her exhale was slow and controlled. "So it's real. It's real. I need you to do something today that you're not going to be comfortable with. Tell me. Your board meeting, the one you said was coming. Move it up. Call it yourself, today if you can, and disclose everything. The connections to Hargrove Group, your cooperation with the investigation, the investigators' report, all of it, on the record, before anyone else surfaces it." A silence. Nathan, that's going to be a catastrophic meeting. I know, but right now you control the narrative. By next week, when the task force starts making moves and names start appearing in official documents, you won't. He kept his voice even. You want to be the person who came forward voluntarily, not the person who was disclosed. She was quiet long enough that he thought she might push back. Then, okay, I'll call it for this afternoon. One more thing. Patricia Sorrell, has she confirmed she'll speak with Park? Last night, Park's office is setting up a protected interview location, off-site, not at the precinct. Vivian paused. She asked me to be there, not in the interview, just in the building. She said it would help her feel less alone. Can you do that? Yes. A pause. I already told her I would. He put the phone down and looked at the photograph in the hallway. Emma's mother, mid-laugh, caught by someone who'd loved her enough to take the picture at exactly that moment. He looked at it the way he sometimes did when the situation required him to be more certain than he actually felt. Because uncertainty was fine, but it wasn't something he could afford to show right now. And looking at that photograph had a way of reminding him what certain felt like. Then he got up, refilled his coffee, and got back to work. Vivian's board meeting lasted 3 hours and 40 minutes. She told Nathan about it that evening, sitting across from him at the same coffee shop table that had become, without either of them formally deciding it, the place where they exchanged information when the situation required a room without walls that might be listening. She looked like someone who had run a long distance and was still processing the fact that she'd finished. 4 board members want to retain independent counsel to explore the company's liability, she said. 2 want to issue a statement distancing Sterling Meridian from the investigation entirely. 1, Marcus Webb, the senior board member, no relation to the child, she caught the coincidence and let it pass, actually stood up and said, and I'm quoting, that I had single-handedly created an existential threat to the company by inserting myself into a criminal matter for personal reasons. What personal reasons? He didn't specify. I think he meant you. She said it without particular emphasis, just dropping it in front of him like something that needed to be acknowledged. The implication being that my motivations were not entirely professional. Nathan looked at her. Are they? She held his gaze for a moment. I started this because a 12-year-old was on a hallway floor and the people responsible were going to make it disappear. That's still why I'm doing it. She paused. If some of the other things have gotten more complicated along the way, that doesn't change the original reason. He didn't push it further, and she didn't offer more, and they both moved on in the way they'd developed of acknowledging something without requiring it to be resolved. "What was the outcome?" he said. "I retain operational control. 2 board members are consulting their personal attorneys, which may mean resignations. The company's general counsel is now fully briefed and is cooperating with the task force." She picked up her coffee. "It was brutal. I've had hard board meetings before. This was different. Because this time it was personal. Because this time I was right, and I knew I was right, and I still had to sit there and defend it for 4 hours." She looked at the table. "That's a particular kind of exhausting." He understood that more than he could easily articulate. "You held." "I held." She looked up. "Tell me something happened on your side today worth all of that." "The Castellan backup servers. Forensic team recovered 2 deleted camera angles from the hallway. They're being processed now." He watched her face. "And the Webb family. The mother in Portland. Park's team reached her this morning. She's not coming forward publicly, but she's given a sworn statement to federal investigators corroborating the payment structure and naming the attorney who represented them at the time of the settlement." Vivian set her cup down. "The attorney who told them to sign. The same firm appears in the Sorrell case. Different attorney from the same firm. Both of them referred by the same source, a financial advisor with documented ties to the Hargrove Group." She absorbed this. They sent their own lawyer in to represent the people they were paying off, to make sure the agreements held the way they needed them to hold, and to make sure those people believed they had independent counsel when they didn't. He paused. "That's the part that's going to matter most in a courtroom. It converts the financial settlements from civil matters into something considerably more serious." "What does Park say?" "Park says the federal coordination is now formal. This is no longer a city investigation with federal awareness. It's a joint investigation, and the city component is running under federal oversight specifically because of the Vance connection." He folded his hands on the table. "They moved fast. Faster than I expected." "Is that good or bad?" "It means they found enough in that briefing document to justify urgency, which is good." He paused. "It also means the Hargrove's attorneys are now dealing with federal investigators instead of local ones, which is considerably harder to manage with political connections at the city level." Vivian looked at him for a moment. "How are you doing?" "Not the investigation. You." He wasn't expecting the question, which meant his first reaction showed on his face before he could manage it. He looked at the table and then back at her. "I'm okay." That's what Emma says when she doesn't know what else to say. He half smiled before he could stop it. "She gets it from her mother. And her mother got it from... probably just from being a person who learned to keep going." He paused. "I'm tired. I'm worried about Emma even when she's in front of me. I'm doing the thing I was trained to do, which is focus on the task and defer the emotional accounting until later." He said it plainly, without apology. "Later is going to be expensive." She looked at him with something that wasn't pity. He would have felt the difference, but was something quieter and more careful. "Okay," she said. I wanted to ask." "I know." He did know, and found that he didn't mind it. Okay. The intimidation arrived in a new form 3 days later. Not toward Emma this time, toward Vivian. She called him at 6 in the morning, earlier than she'd ever called, and her voice had a quality he hadn't heard before. Not fear exactly, but the precursor to it, the sound of someone who had encountered something unexpected and was working to process it without losing their footing. "Someone accessed my home security system last night," she said. "The alert came at 2:14 a.m., a remote login through my smart home interface. It lasted 11 seconds and then disconnected." Nathan was up and dressed before she finished the sentence. "Is anything in your home altered? Cameras, locks, anything that interfaces with the system?" "I don't know. I called my security company and they're sending someone this morning." A pause. "They want me to know they know where I live." That's what the 11 seconds was. "Yes," he thought quickly. "Don't stay there today." "Is there somewhere you can work that isn't your office or your home?" "I have a..." "Yes. A colleague has space." "Go there. Don't tell anyone in your regular orbit where you are. Do you have personal security?" "I have a driver." "Is your driver your own hire or a company resource?" A pause. Company. Who manages the company's staffing? He could hear her thinking through it. Vivian. Until you know what's compromised within your company. My own hire, she said immediately. I'll arrange my own hire by this afternoon. Good. He was already on his laptop, pulling up Park's number. I'm going to call Park now. The home system accesses evidence. Don't let your security company touch anything until Park's people have had a look at the login record. Okay. A beat. Nathan. Yeah. I'm not going to stop. She said it like she was testing how it sounded out loud. I want you to know that. Whatever they think 11 seconds in my security system is going to accomplish, I know, he said. I know you're not going to stop. She hung up. He called Park, and then he drove to the precinct because there were things that needed to be said in person. Park looked worse than the last time he'd seen her, which meant she looked like someone fighting a case that kept expanding in directions she hadn't planned for. She had 2 whiteboards in her office now. One of them was a map of entities, company names, individual names, arrows between them, dollar amounts in red. The other was a timeline. Nathan looked at the timeline for a moment and identified 4 entries that weren't there the last time he'd been in the room. The home system access, Park said before he could start. We're on it. The login was routed through 3 proxy servers and partially anonymized, but the forensic tech thinks she can trace the originating IP. It'll take time. What's the timeline on the arrests? Park looked at him steadily. I can't give you that. Ballpark. She said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Days, he said, not weeks. Still nothing, which meant he was right. Then they know it too, he said. That's why they went after Vivian's home system. They're trying to shake us loose in the last window they have. He sat down in the chair across from her desk. What do you need from me before that window closes? Emma. Park's voice shifted slightly. If this moves to a public hearing, and it will, the prosecution is going to want her testimony, not just as the inciting victim, but as the starting point of the chain, the incident that opened everything else. She held his gaze. She's 12, Nathan. I need to know if she can do that. He thought about Emma memorizing the faces of 2 men on a sidewalk. Emma sitting at a kitchen table doing homework 3 days after being kicked in the ribs because stopping felt worse than continuing. Emma saying, I want to know what's happening and meaning it. She can do it, he said, but I want her prepped properly. I want her to understand every step before she walks in there, and I want her to have the option to stop at any point. If she decides she can't, I'm not forcing her. Understood. We'll work with a victim's advocate who has experience with minors. And I want to talk to her about it myself, before anyone official does. He paused. She trusts me. I don't want the first conversation about this to come from a stranger. Of course. Park nodded. There's one more thing. Gerald Fitch was brought in for questioning this morning. Nathan went very still. He lawyered up within the first 4 minutes, which was expected. But before he did, he said one thing that I want you to know about. Park looked at her desk, then back at him. He said, Victor Hargrove did not know what Caden was doing. He found out the same day everyone else did, and everything after that was damage control. The room was quiet. He's trying to separate the father from the son, Nathan said. He's trying to build a defense architecture that concentrates criminal liability in the cover-up rather than in the original act. It would leave Caden facing juvenile charges, serious but manageable, and potentially reduce Victor's exposure to obstruction and conspiracy rather than the deeper financial crimes. Park's voice was flat. It won't hold given what we now have on the Sentinel education structure, but it tells us the defense strategy. They're going to try to make this about one incident and one bad reaction to it, not 11 years. They'll try. Our job is to make sure they can't. She picked up a pen and set it down again. The recovered footage is clean, Nathan. Both angles. Emma on the ground, Caden, the students filming, timestamp unedited, unaltered from the backup server. It's the cleanest piece of evidence in this entire case, and they didn't know it existed when they deleted the other copies. He sat with that for a moment. His daughter on the ground, recorded in clean, unaltered digital clarity, preserved by a corporate liability decision that had nothing to do with justice and had accidentally served it anyway. The world was full of that kind of crooked luck, and he'd stopped questioning it years ago. Good, he said. That's good. He talked to Emma that evening after dinner. He'd thought about how to start the conversation for most of the day, and in the end, he started it the same way he started most things with her. Directly, without preamble, because she'd always handled directness better than she handled being managed. I need to talk to you about the hearing, he said, when this goes to trial. Emma looked up from the book she'd been reading. She'd been reading more than usual lately, which he recognized as the same impulse as the garden. Something to do with her hands, something that required her attention without requiring her to feel anything particular. Okay, she said. They're going to want you to testify, to tell what happened, in front of people, officially. He sat down on the arm of the couch. You don't have to. I want to be completely clear that this is your choice, and I will support whatever you decide. Emma was quiet for a moment. What happens if I don't? The case still goes forward. There's other evidence, footage, financial records, other witnesses. You're not the only thing holding this together. But it would help, if I did. He looked at her. Yes, it would help. She looked back at her book without opening it. The other kids, the ones who were there and watched and filmed, are any of them testifying? I don't know yet. Possibly. The ones who got their phones out while I was on the ground. She said it without heat, which was somehow harder to hear than anger would have been. Some of them posted those videos, and now maybe they get to be witnesses, like they were just observing. He didn't have a good answer for that, because there wasn't one. Yeah, he said. She turned the book over in her hands. I want to do it. Are you sure? No. She looked up. But I think that's probably how it feels when you do the right thing. You're not sure and you do it anyway. She paused. That's what you said about Mom. He hadn't said that exactly, but close enough. You don't have to decide tonight. I know, but I want to. She opened her book again. I'm going to think about what I want to say. Can I write it out first? Yeah, that's a good idea. She nodded and went back to reading or to looking at the page while she thought. He couldn't always tell the difference. He sat on the arm of the couch for another minute, not because there was more to say, but because sometimes being in the same room was enough. Vivian called at 9 that night. My investigator found something else, she said. I almost didn't tell you tonight because I think you need to sleep, but I couldn't sit on it. Tell me. Harold Vance, the council member. He's not just a recipient. His chief of staff has been communicating directly with Fitch for the past 2 years. We have 17 email exchanges obtained through the investigator's source inside the council building. I'm not going to specify the source, but it's reliable and the material is verifiable. She took a breath. In those emails, Fitch updates the chief of staff on active legal complaints against Hargrove entities. The chief of staff's responses include, on 4 separate occasions, information about investigative timelines and assignment changes within the police department. Nathan was on his feet. He was getting information from inside the department and feeding it to Fitch. For 2 years, which explains how they knew about Park, how they knew to move quickly on the footage, how they knew... She stopped. How they knew Emma's route home. The last sentence landed and sat there. Nathan walked to the window. Outside, the street was ordinary and dark. A car passed. A dog barked somewhere and stopped. This goes to the federal team tonight, he said. I know. I'm sending it now. I wanted you to hear it from me first. He stood at the window for a moment. He thought about the shape of what they'd uncovered. Not just a family protecting a violent kid, which was what it had looked like in the nurse's office 5 weeks ago. A system. 11 years, 7 schools, 4 states, bought lawyers and bribed politicians, and a city council member's chief of staff feeding police intelligence to the people who needed it. And at the center of it, somewhere in a building Nathan had never entered, Victor Hargrove, who had built all of this with the patient confidence of a man who had never once been made to face what he'd done. Vivian, he said. Yeah. Thank you. For all of it. A pause. He could hear her breathe. You would have found it anyway, she said. Maybe. Slower. Maybe slower. Another pause. Nathan, what happens after this? After the arrests, after the hearings, after all of it? What does your life look like? He thought about it honestly. a thing he'd been avoiding because the future had seemed like a thing to deal with after the present was finished. I don't know exactly. Quieter, I hope. Emma goes back to being a kid. He paused. What about you? The foundation, she said. The one I've been planning. For children in situations like this, like Emma, like Marcus Webb, like whoever came before them that we didn't find. She paused. I've been thinking about what it should look like. It needs someone who understands both the systems that protect these kids and the ones that fail them. Institutional knowledge and field knowledge. That's a very specific job description. It is, isn't it? She didn't say anything else, and he didn't either, and the silence between them had the particular quality of something that didn't need to be filled yet. Get some sleep, he said finally. You too. He stood at the window after she hung up, looking at the ordinary dark street, and thought about how 5 weeks ago he'd been under a kitchen sink with a wrench and a flashlight, and the world had been small and manageable in the way he'd spent 2 years carefully constructing it to be. And then a phone had buzzed on a counter above him, 3 times rapid, and the world had cracked open into something entirely else. He'd spent 11 years in places where the line between holding and breaking was thinner than anyone outside those places ever understood. He knew what it felt like to be close to both. He knew that the difference, most of the time, was not strength or training or any of the things people wanted it to be. It was just the decision, made again and again in increments so small they barely registered, to keep going for 1 more hour, 1 more day, 1 more thing that needed doing. Emma was asleep down the hall with a notebook on her nightstand where she was writing, in her careful handwriting, what she wanted to say when the time came. Patricia Sorrell was somewhere in the Westfield district, having made a decision 6 years late that was going to cost her something and was the right thing anyway. The Webb family was in Portland, and the mother had given a sworn statement with a voice Nathan imagined sounded something like Emma's, thin and controlled and more frightened than she was letting on. And Victor Hargrove, right now, was somewhere being told by very expensive attorneys that the architecture he'd spent 11 years building had developed a crack that was no longer manageable. Nathan turned away from the window and went to his desk and opened his laptop. There was still work to do. There was always, until there wasn't, still work to do. The arrests happened on a Thursday morning in early March, 7 weeks after Emma's text had come in at 11:47 on a Tuesday. Nathan heard about it from Park at 6:50 a.m., a call that was brief and factual in the way Park's calls always were when she had good news, like she didn't trust the good news enough yet to give it more words than necessary. Victor Hargrove was taken into federal custody at 5:40 this morning. Gerald Fitch at approximately the same time. Caden Hargrove was processed through the juvenile system. Diane Marsh and 2 school board members were arrested separately. Harold Vance's chief of staff was taken in conjunction with the federal team. She paused. Vance himself was interviewed this morning and has retained counsel. That matter is ongoing. Nathan sat at his kitchen table in the gray early light and didn't say anything for a moment. The Sentinel Education Partner structure has been referred to the Attorney General's office in 3 states, Park continued. The Webb family's statement, Sorrell's testimony, and the financial records from your investigator form the backbone of the financial crimes charges. Another pause, longer. We would not be here without what you built, Nathan. I want to say that on record, even if there's no one to record it. You did the work, he said. We both did. A brief quiet. Tell Emma. He went to Emma's room and knocked lightly. She was already half awake. She'd been sleeping lighter than usual for weeks, the way people did when they were waiting for something. She sat up and looked at him, and he told her in the same plain way he told her most things, without cushioning or ceremony, because she'd never responded well to either. She listened. When he finished, she looked at her hands in her lap for a long moment. Is it over? She said. The arrests are. The hearings are still ahead. She nodded slowly. Okay. She looked up. Are you okay? He almost said, I'm fine, and stopped himself. Yeah, he said instead. I actually am. She got up and hugged him, which she didn't do often anymore. She was at the age where physical affection came in brief, practical installments, rather than the long, unguarded kind of when she was small. He held on for an extra second, and she let him, which was its own thing. I want pancakes, she said when she pulled back. Real ones, not the mix. I don't know how to make real ones. You can learn. She went to her dresser. There are videos. He went back to the kitchen and looked up a pancake recipe on his phone. And that was how the morning of the arrests began. Nathan Cross standing at a counter reading ingredient proportions off a screen while his daughter showered down the hall. The world outside the window starting its ordinary Thursday without any particular acknowledgement of what had just changed inside it. Vivian called at 8. Her voice had a quality he hadn't heard in it before. Not relief exactly, because relief implied that the tension was gone, and they both knew the hearings ahead meant the tension was only changing shape. It was something more like the particular steadiness of someone who had been braced for a long time and was only now remembering what it felt like to stand without that bracing. I heard, she said. Park called me at 6:50. I heard at 7. One of the federal attorneys. She paused. My 2 board members who were consulting personal attorneys, they're both staying. They called me this morning. Apparently watching Victor Hargrove get arrested in federal custody adjusted their risk assessment of my judgment. People respond to outcomes, he said. They do. A quiet beat. How's Emma? She asked for pancakes, from scratch. He heard something that might have been a laugh, brief and real. Good instinct. How are yours turning out? He looked at the pan. The first attempt had been too thick and burned on the outside before cooking through. The second looked slightly better. Instructive, he said. That's diplomatic. She paused. Nathan. The foundation. I've been talking to the attorney who's going to help structure it, and there's a position I need to fill. Someone who leads the operational side. Prevention programs, school partnerships, training for administrators on how to actually handle these situations instead of managing them. She stopped. I've been trying to figure out how to ask you this without it being strange. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the pancake in the pan, which was probably done. You're asking if I want to be involved. I'm asking if you'd consider it. The consulting work you've been doing, you're good at it, I know, but you've told me it's not what you want to be doing in 5 years. This would be... She stopped again, differently this time. I'm not trying to make this something it isn't. It would be a real job with structure and a board and accountability. It's not... Vivian. Yeah. Ask me the actual question. A pause. Would you want to work with me on this? Not because of everything that happened, because I think you'd be good at it, and I think it matters, and I'd like you to be there. He looked at the photograph in the hallway. Emma's mother, mid-laugh, caught by someone who loved her. Yeah, he said. I would. He heard her breathe. Okay, she said. Okay, good. And then more quietly, I burned my toast this morning. I was distracted. I have too many pancakes. Come over. A brief silence that had something warm inside it. I'll be there in 30 minutes. He flipped the pancake. It was actually fine. Not perfect, slightly uneven, a little darker on one edge. Fine was enough. Mlokin. The public hearing was set for 6 weeks after the arrests. In that 6 weeks, things happened in an order that Nathan tracked partly because it mattered legally, and partly because he'd spent his whole adult life understanding that the period after a mission was as important as the mission itself. That what you did with what you'd survived determined whether surviving it meant anything. Caden Hargrove's juvenile hearing was closed to the public. He was represented by 3 attorneys, and he was 16 years old, and the outcome was what juvenile outcomes usually were. Structured, protective of his future in the ways the system was designed to be protective, which Nathan found he could accept without peace, but with something close to it. The system wasn't built to destroy 16-year-olds, even ones who had done what Caden did. It was built to hold them accountable in proportion, and the accountability was real. He would carry it for years. Nathan decided that would have to be enough, because deciding otherwise was a road he wasn't willing to start down. Victor Hargrove's legal team was formidable in exactly the way Gerald Fitch had promised Nathan's legal team would be, back when Fitch was calling with settlement offers and soft threats. They filed motions, they challenged evidence, they attempted to characterize the Sentinel education structure as a legitimate consulting operation and the financial settlements as routine legal resolutions. The federal prosecutors, working with the documentation Vivian's investigator had produced, and the Webb family's sworn statement and Park's 2 years of careful work, dismantled each argument with the specific, unhurried thoroughness of people who knew they had more than they needed. Patricia Sorrell's deposition was taken in a conference room in a law office 12 blocks from Crestfield. Vivian sat in the waiting area for 3 hours while it happened, working on her laptop, available if Sorrell needed a familiar face in the break between sessions. When Sorrell came out at the end of the 3rd hour, she looked like someone who had set down something she'd been carrying for a long time and wasn't entirely sure what to do with her now empty hands. She and Vivian sat in the waiting area together for a while without talking much, and Sorrell said, at some point, "I should have done this in 2019, and Vivian said, "You're doing it now," and that was all that needed to be said about it. Emma worked on what she wanted to say. She wrote it in the notebook on her nightstand, revised it twice, and read it to Nathan one evening while he sat on the edge of her bed. He listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he told her honestly that it was good. Not perfect, not polished, which was exactly right, because what the hearing needed was not a 12-year-old who sounded like a lawyer's brief, but a 12-year-old who sounded like herself. There was a passage near the middle where she talked about the students filming instead of helping, and what it felt like to be on the floor and hear the sound of phones being raised rather than voices being raised, and Nathan had to look at the window for a moment when she read that part. "Is it too much?" Emma said. "No," he said. "It's exactly right." Quotes. The hearing was held on a Tuesday in a room that was larger than Nathan expected and more crowded. He'd been in rooms under pressure before, rooms where the outcome was uncertain and the stakes were high and the people around you were frightened in ways they were trying not to show. He was familiar with how those rooms felt. This one felt different, and it took him a few minutes of sitting in it to understand why. In those other rooms, the people afraid were the ones on his side. In this one, for the first time, the people afraid were the ones who had spent 11 years making sure they never had to be afraid of anything. Victor Hargrove sat at the defense table in a suit that probably cost more than Nathan's truck and looked like a man who had spent several weeks constructing a version of composure out of whatever he had left. He was 61, silver-haired, and he had the kind of bearing that came from decades of being the most important person in any room he entered. In this room, for the first time, he was not. Nathan watched him and felt, not satisfaction, because satisfaction was too simple for what this was, but something closer to the particular clarity that followed a long period of uncertainty. The recognition that the thing you believed was real had turned out to be real. Vivian sat 2 rows behind Nathan on the left side of the room. She'd worn something professional and dark, and her hair was back. She looked like a CEO, and she looked like herself, and Nathan had stopped being surprised that those 2 things were the same person. Emma sat beside Nathan in a pale blue sweater she'd chosen herself that morning, standing in front of her closet for 10 minutes before deciding. Her hair was down. She had a copy of her statement in a folder on her lap, and she held the folder with both hands, not nervously, but steadily, the way you held something you intended to use. The proceedings began at 9 o'clock. The prosecution laid out the case over 3 hours in the morning session: financial crimes, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, the Sentinel education structure across 4 states and 7 schools, the documented pattern of legal settlements managed through attorneys who represented the opposing party's interests, the 41 access events on the Crestfield security system under Fitch's credentials, the recovered footage that showed exactly what it showed with a timestamp and an unbroken chain of custody. The lead federal prosecutor was a woman in her mid-50s who spoke without theatrics and didn't need them, because the evidence spoke in a register that theatrics would only have diminished. During the lunch break, Nathan walked Emma to the cafeteria in the building's lower level, and they ate sandwiches that neither of them tasted and didn't talk much. A victim's advocate named Rosa, who had been working with Emma for 3 weeks, sat across from them and talked about ordinary things: her dog, a television show she'd been watching, the coffee in the building's vending machine that she described as genuinely terrible in a way that made Emma almost smile. "How are you feeling?" Rosa asked Emma. "Like I want to throw up," Emma said. "That's about right," Rosa said. "Do you need to change anything in your statement?" Emma shook her head. "No, I've got it." "Okay." Rosa topped off her terrible coffee. "You ready?" Emma looked at Nathan across the table. He looked back at her. He didn't say anything encouraging because she didn't need encouragement. She'd already made her decision 3 weeks ago, and she'd held it every day since, and what she needed right now was not to be told she could do it, but to have someone confirm that they knew she already knew she could. Yeah, Emma said. She looked back at Rosa. I'm ready. She testified in the afternoon session. She walked to the front of the room with her folder and her pale blue sweater, and she sat in the chair, and she looked at the people around her with the same straight-back composure she'd walked through Crestfield's front entrance with on the morning after the incident, and Nathan sat in the gallery and breathed slowly and kept his hands flat on his knees. She started with what happened. She told it plainly. The hallway, Tyler Moss being mocked, the 2 times she asked Caden to stop, the moment his hand closed on her arm. She didn't use the word terrified because she hadn't been terrified in that moment, she explained. She'd been angry, and then she'd been on the ground, and then she'd been in pain, and by the time she was in pain, the anger had become something quieter and more patient that she didn't have a name for yet. The room was very still when she talked about the phones. I heard them, she said. The sound of phones, like when someone's taking a picture of something interesting. And I remember thinking, I'm the interesting thing. That's what I am to these people right now. She looked at the folder in her hands and then back up. And I thought, someone is going to see this, and it's going to just be entertainment. And then it's going to go away, and everyone who watched it is going to move on with their day. She paused. I didn't want to move on. I didn't want to be the thing that got watched and forgotten. Another pause. So I thought, okay, if they're going to film this, then someone is going to have to look at it. Not watch it, actually look at it. There was a quality in the room Nathan couldn't name. Not silence exactly. Silence was the absence of something. This was the presence of something. 40 people in a formal proceeding, and all of them doing the same thing, which was listening to a 12-year-old who had decided that being seen was not the same as being known. She talked about the weeks after. The settlement offer that came the morning after the incident, the letter from the attorneys, the way the school had responded, the way the administration had moved, the careful management of a situation that should not have been manageable. She talked about finding out that she wasn't the first, that there had been others, in other schools, other hallways, handled the same way by the same people, using the same money, and the same lawyers, and the same fundamental belief that the truth was something that could be purchased into silence. I'm not special, she said. I'm not braver or stronger or anything different from Marcus Webb or the girl who went to Ms. Sorrell or any of the other people who this happened to. The difference is that my dad is... She stopped, looked at her folder. My dad doesn't stop. That's the only difference. He's not perfect, and he doesn't pretend to be, and he doesn't do things the way you see in movies where everything works out because the hero is strong enough. He just doesn't stop. And I've been trying to figure out for the past 7 weeks if that's something you have or something you decide. She looked up. I think it's something you decide. Every day, probably. Maybe every hour. I think you have to keep deciding it. She closed her folder. That's what I wanted to say. The room stayed still for a moment after she stopped. Then the proceedings' formalities resumed, and the moment passed the way moments did, back into the motion of things. Nathan looked at the ceiling for a second. He didn't trust himself to look at much else. Vivian testified in the late afternoon as the light outside the room's high windows had shifted from flat midday white into something warmer and more angled. She was precise, organized, thorough. She covered her eyewitness account of the hallway incident, her discovery of the Hargrove Group connections within Sterling Meridian's portfolio, her decision to cooperate with the investigation, and the material her investigator had produced. She spoke without notes, which Nathan had known she would, and she answered the defense attorney's questions with the specific calm of someone who had no misrepresentations to protect. The defense attorney who handled her cross-examination was a man named Briarwood, who was very good at his job and who had spent 35 years learning how to imply things without quite saying them. He implied that Vivian's cooperation was motivated by a desire to deflect from her own company's financial exposure. He implied that her relationship with Nathan Cross represented a conflict of interest that colored her account. He implied with particular care that a CEO with her resources and connections had chosen to insert herself into a criminal investigation for reasons that were personal rather than civic. Vivian let him finish each implication before she responded, which was a technique Nathan recognized as the correct one. Don't defend before the attack is complete, because defending early gives the attack more shape than it deserves. My company had financial ties to Hargrove Group entities that I disclosed voluntarily as soon as I discovered them, she said. If my goal was to protect Sterling Meridian's exposure, voluntary disclosure would be a poor strategy. A beat. On the question of my relationship with Nathan Cross, I met him for the first time in this investigation. And yes, working alongside someone for 7 weeks on something that matters creates a relationship of some kind. I don't think that relationship has distorted my account of what I saw in a school hallway. I know what I saw. Briarwood tried one more angle. Miss Sterling, isn't it possible that your emotional investment in this case— I am emotionally invested, she said, before he finished. A child was attacked, and a system designed to help her was used to protect the people who attacked her. I think emotional investment in that situation is the appropriate response. She looked at him directly. I'd be more concerned about a person who wasn't. Briarwood moved on. The verdicts came 41 days after the hearing closed. Victor Hargrove, guilty on 12 counts, including conspiracy to obstruct justice, financial fraud, and racketeering. Fitch, guilty on 9 counts. Marsh and the 2 board members, guilty on charges related to the cover-up and the mishandling of abuse complaints. Vance's chief of staff, guilty on 4 counts, the federal investigation into Vance himself ongoing. In 3 other states, parallel proceedings had been initiated based on the Sentinel education documentation, and the attorneys who had represented complainants against the Hargroves while receiving referral fees from Hargrove entities faced disbarment proceedings in 2 jurisdictions. Sentencing happened across multiple proceedings over the following weeks. Victor Hargrove received 14 years. Fitch received 9. The others received sentences commensurate with their roles and their cooperation. Marsh, who eventually cooperated substantially with prosecutors, received a reduced sentence that she would spend the first years of in a minimum security facility. Nathan heard the Hargrove sentence on the radio while driving Emma to school on a Friday morning. He turned the volume up slightly when the segment started, and Emma listened, and when it was over, the radio moved on to weather and traffic. Emma looked out the window. 14 years, she said. He'll be in his 70s when he gets out. Yes. Does that feel like enough? He thought about it honestly, which was the only way he knew how to think about things like this. I don't know. I don't think I'm the right person to calibrate what enough means here. What I know is that it's real, and it's on record, and the next person he might have done this to is going to have a harder time being made to disappear. Emma seemed to turn that over. That's not really about him, that's about the next person. Yeah. Is that enough for you? He drove for a moment without answering. Then, it has to be. Wanting more than that starts to be about something else, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life carrying something else. Emma nodded slowly, like she was storing that. She was quiet until they reached the Crestfield Circle, where a new interim administration had been in place for 6 weeks under district supervision, where the hallway had new cameras installed by a company with no connection to anyone named Hargrove, where a third of the student body had turned over in the wake of the scandal, and the ones who remained were navigating a version of their school they hadn't been prepared for. Emma got out. She turned back before she closed the door. Dad, she said. Yeah. I think it's enough. She looked at him steadily. I think it's enough. She shut the door and walked through the entrance without looking back. He watched until she was inside. Then he sat in the circle for an extra minute, in the way he'd started doing since she went back. Just an extra minute. Not because he needed to, but because the cost of an extra minute was nothing, and the alternative was assuming that nothing else would ever happen. And he didn't think he'd ever be the kind of person who could make that assumption without effort. He drove away. The Crossweb Sorrel Initiative launched 6 months after the verdicts. The name had taken 3 meetings to settle. Vivian had wanted something cleaner and more institutional, and Nathan had pointed out that clean institutional names were what the Hargroves had used for Sentinel education partners, and that something with real names in it was harder to misuse. Vivian had considered this for exactly 4 seconds and said, "You're right," and that had been the end of the argument. Patricia Sorrell joined the Foundation's board. She'd gone back to teaching, not at a community center this time, but at a mid-sized private school across the city that had recruited her specifically because of her testimony and what it represented. She drove too fast and kept her phone on silent during classes, and cried once at the foundation's first board meeting when the scope of what they were building was laid out in full, and then got businesslike and efficient and added 17 items to the action plan in 40 minutes. Nathan took the operational director position. It was not a simple transition. The work was different from what he'd done before, less tactical in some ways and more complicated in others. And there were weeks in the first 2 months where he sat in meetings that ran 40 minutes over their scheduled time and thought with genuine longing about the uncomplicated logic of intelligence analysis. But there were also days when he sat across from a school administrator who had inherited a broken system and genuinely didn't know how to make it work right. And he could see the shape of what was wrong and the sequence for fixing it. And those days reminded him that what he'd been trained to do was not specific to any particular kind of problem. It was about understanding systems. And systems that failed children were systems he understood better now than he'd ever wanted to. He was good at the work. He was not immediately good at all of it. The fundraising portion, in particular, involved a kind of sustained performance of optimism that didn't come naturally to him and required effort. He resented spending. Vivian was patient with this in a way that was not entirely patient, which was to say she told him when he was bad at something and told him specifically why and told him how to improve. And that was the kind of not patience he'd been able to work with his whole life. They figured out the other things slowly, in the way people who are both careful figure things out, without announcements or declarations, in increments so small that looking at any one of them, you couldn't have said with certainty what it was. He made her dinner at his apartment one Thursday evening in October because she'd been in back-to-back meetings since 7 in the morning, and he'd been there when she said she hadn't eaten. That became a Thursday thing without anyone deciding it was a Thursday thing. One evening, Emma, who had been doing her homework at the kitchen table while Nathan cooked and Vivian sat across from her helping with a history essay, looked up and said, without preamble, "Are you two going to date officially, or is this just going to keep being this?" And Vivian had gone very still, and Nathan had continued chopping onions and said, "Mind your homework." And Emma had returned to her essay with the expression of someone who had received her answer and was satisfied with it. Vivian looked at Nathan across the kitchen. He looked back at her. He did not say anything, because the moment didn't need words, and he'd spent enough of his life filling silences with words that were only there to cover the silence. He went back to chopping onions. Vivian went back to the history essay. The kitchen smelled like garlic, and something was warm on the stove, and Emma was muttering to herself about the causes of World War I. And outside the window, the October dark was thick and close. It was ordinary. That was what struck him about it, how ordinary it was. He'd spent so long in the extraordinary, in the high stakes and the dangerous and the unresolvable, that he'd forgotten ordinary was something you could build, that it wasn't just what happened between the hard parts, that it was something you could choose if you were willing to stop treating it as temporary. In December, Nathan signed a contract with a veterans organization to develop a service dog training program. It was part-time, 2 mornings a week, and it had nothing to do with the foundation or corporate investigations or 11-year patterns of institutional corruption. It was just dogs and veterans and the specific, uncomplicated patience that both of them required. He'd been drawn to it for reasons he didn't entirely explain to anyone, but that had something to do with what Emma had said in the car, that enough might not be about the person who'd done the harm, but about the next person. The person who hadn't been harmed yet. The veteran who came back with something broken that a dog could, with time and the right kind of attention, help put back together. He was not good at it in the beginning. The dogs read him correctly from the first day. They knew he was tense in ways he didn't know he was tense, and they responded to it by being uncertain, and he had to learn to slow down further than he'd thought possible and stay there, in the slow, until they trusted the pace. It took him 2 months to stop pushing and start waiting. The trainer he worked with, a woman named DiCaprio, who was 63 and had been doing this for 30 years and had approximately no patience for Nathan's initial instinct to accelerate everything, told him on the 4th week that he was making progress. "How can you tell?" he said. "The dogs are relaxed when you come in now," she said. "Before they knew you wanted something. Now they just know you're here." He thought about that on the drive home. He thought about it a lot. Emma's 13th birthday was in January. She wanted pancakes in the morning, real ones, from scratch, and she wanted to spend the afternoon at the botanical garden that she and her mother had gone to every year until her mother couldn't anymore, and that Emma had stopped going to for 3 years after that because some things were too complicated to return to all at once. This year, she was ready. Nathan knew because she told him, in the direct way she told him most things now. "I want to go to the botanical garden. I think I'm ready." Vivian came for the morning pancakes. She brought flowers that she'd picked herself from a market she went to on weekends, an assortment that wasn't coordinated and was slightly too large for Nathan's only vase, and Emma arranged them on the kitchen table with the focused efficiency she brought to everything and said they looked good, which they did. The three of them sat at the table with pancakes that Nathan had gotten substantially better at, and outside the kitchen window the January light was thin and clear, and Emma talked about something that had happened at school that week, a project she was working on, a disagreement with a teacher she thought was wrong and had respectfully said so in terms that had gotten her a meeting with the new interim principal, who had listened to her and not dismissed her and changed the assignment parameters. She told the story with the slightly surprised satisfaction of someone who was still adjusting to a world where being heard was sometimes possible. Vivian listened and offered an opinion, and Emma pushed back on the opinion, and they argued about it productively for several minutes while Nathan ate his pancakes and watched them and felt something he didn't immediately have a name for. It wasn't happiness exactly, though it had happiness in it. It wasn't relief, though it had that too. It was something closer to what he'd told Emma in the car. The thing that was about the next person, not the last one. The sense that whatever had been broken, and whatever had been cost, and whatever had been carried for longer than it should have been carried, had not become nothing. That it had become this kitchen, this table, this ordinary January morning with too many flowers in a vase and pancakes from scratch, and an argument about a school project, and the thin, clear winter light coming through the window, like it had no particular opinion about any of it. He had not always been good at receiving things. He'd been trained to give discipline, protection, endurance, presence. The receiving had always been harder. He was working on it. He thought he would probably always be working on it. But this morning, at this table, he let himself have it without qualification, without waiting for the next hard thing, without calculating what it was going to cost, without treating it as temporary. He let it be real. There's a version of this kind of story where the lesson is simple, where the good people win because they were good, and the bad people lose because they were bad. And the conclusion to draw is that justice always finds its way, and that the truth is always enough. That's not what happened here. What happened here is that a 12-year-old girl was on a hallway floor for 90 seconds while 40 people watched, and a man spent 11 years building a system to make sure moments like that were manageable. And the only reason that system eventually broke is that one person decided not to stop, and that decision was not clean, or confident, or cinematic. It was made under a kitchen sink with a flashlight between his teeth, and then it was made again in a precinct parking lot, and again at a kitchen table at midnight, and again in a car with Emma asking if he was scared, and him saying yes. The truth is not always enough. The truth is a starting point. What comes after the truth, who carries it, how far they're willing to carry it, what they're willing to lose in the carrying, that is the part that determines whether the truth amounts to anything. Nathan Cross was not a hero in the way that word gets used. He was a man who had spent years training himself to be useful in crisis, and then had spent years after that trying to figure out what to do with that training in a world that had fewer crises and more dinners to cook, and homework to check and leaks under kitchen sinks. He made mistakes in this story, moved too fast in some places, too slow in others, held things too tightly when he should have asked for help, and asked for help with things he could have handled. He was not always right. He was sometimes frightened. He was tired in ways that sleep didn't fix. And he did not stop. Vivian Sterling was not a hero either. She was someone who had built a successful company through intelligence and effort, and the willingness to make decisions faster than the people around her, and who had arrived at a Tuesday morning in a school hallway and found something that her intelligence and effort could not outmaneuver. Something that just required her to choose which kind of person she was going to be. She chose. She held the choice through board meetings and legal pressure and 11 seconds of someone in her home security system at 2 a.m. and a cross-examination by a defense attorney who was very good at his job. She held it not because she was certain it was going to work out, but because the alternative was being someone who looked away. And she had looked at too many people who'd looked away to want to become one of them. Emma Cross was not a hero. She was a 12-year-old girl who had been hurt and who was angry about it in a way she didn't always know what to do with, and who decided that her anger was going to be more useful as something deliberate than as something reactive. She was not brave in the way bravery is usually described. She was scared most of the time. She admitted this freely, and she did things anyway. And she's still figuring out whether that's the same thing or something different. What they did together was not clean. It was expensive and slow and uncertain, and there were weeks in the middle of it when any of them, on the right bad day, might have decided the cost was too high. They didn't. And the reason they didn't is not a quality they were born with or a decision they made once. It was a decision they made again and again, in the small increments that don't look like decisions until you assemble them and see what they've built. What they built is this: a record that cannot be managed, a pattern that is now documented and prosecuted in 4 states, and cannot be undismantled by money or political connection or very expensive attorneys. A school that is different. Children who didn't become the next case because the system that would have made them into one no longer exists in the same form. And a family which nobody planned for and which nobody is entirely sure how to talk about, that sits at a kitchen table in January with too many flowers in a vase and argues about school projects and makes pancakes from scratch, and is, in the way that real things are real, imperfect, unfinished, still in the process of becoming alive. That is what enough looks like. Not justice delivered cleanly by people who were never afraid, but truth carried forward, one decision at a time, by people who were afraid and decided it didn't matter. That is the whole story.